My name is Jonathan. I'm a third-year graduate student in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. So I'm the course facilitator for Hard Earth, along with Andrew Santa, who unfortunately was not able to make it today. He is traveling in Spain for a conference. I just want to give you guys a quick, brief background as to what Hard Earth is and kind of why this class exists. So this is the 5th quarter that Hard Earth has been around, so it started in the fall of 2016. And what we're trying to do in this class is essentially look at environmental problems that are very difficult from all of these different kinds of perspectives. So often when you hear or discuss environmental problems, it usually kind of comes up in the context of one or two different fields, whether that's new different types of technology arising through like solar panels or wind turbines, or kind of the science behind climate change, while environmental problems are actually super difficult and kind of span the entire gamut of research. So what we're trying to do is essentially look at how people are working to solve local and global environmental problems from all of these different kinds of fields, whether it's behavioral psychology, journalism, or sociology, or kind of everything. So luckily, being here at Stanford, a lot of this work is actually happening here on campus. So what we wanted to do is kind of create this speaker series as a platform for graduate students to come in and talk about the cool research that they're doing, and then be able to kind of establish a stronger dialogue with the undergraduate community as well, which is why we're doing this here in Robley. So often I feel like the graduate and undergrad community don't interact enough, and there's kind of a lot to be gained from both parties. So this is actually a 1-unit course, so if you're interested, I highly encourage you to sign up. We have 5 speakers throughout the quarter. On the alternating weeks when speakers are not here, we have a discussion section where we pretty much chat about the previous week's talk, interact with the material a little bit more, and kind of see what people were able to take away from it, and kind of the different perspectives that people have from what we learned from the previous week. So please sign up. It's really cool. You get to hear a lot of different perspectives from different people. If not, you're also highly encouraged to come to just the talks themselves and hear about the cool work that's being done. So what I'm excited to introduce to you today is Jacob, who is a PhD student in energy resources engineering, and he's going to talk to you about life cycle assessment and essentially what that framework is, and potentially how that can even tie into how we make some more day-to-day decisions, and talk to you about his actual research in different types of fuel. So please welcome Jacob.
It's really great to be here, and thank you, Jonathan, and for inviting me to speak. I did my undergrad here, so it's really great to be able to come back to the dorms. And I wasn't, I spent most of my undergrad time on the other side of campus, but it's cool to come here. Yeah, I did an Earth Systems major and did a master's in CE and atmospheric energy. So if you have any questions about that or doing that, I'd be happy to answer those kind of questions later on. So I'm talking about what life cycle assessment, which is a kind of one of the bodies of work that I do my research on. And so as an exercise of that, I brought kind of a cartoon example. So should I, if I was going to have a cup of coffee, should I use a ceramic cup or should I use a paper cup? And what should you, how many do you think you should be using the paper cup? Okay. Why do you think that might be? What would you think that, like, oh, I should use a paper cup and not a ceramic?
I guess maybe you have to, the energy that it takes when you heat water and have to watch the mug, so that can take up a lot of energy.
That's a very valid concern. How much energy does it take to wash these things every day and use it? All right, how many think this is ceramic mug? It's the more sustainable choice. Okay. Can you give me an example, or give me a reason why you think that might be? Sure.
Well, you build it once and you can reuse many times.
Okay, sure. So it's like it's something that's disposable versus something that's not. Okay. So that kind of what you just did was basically the very beginnings of what it means to do life cycle thinking. It's the idea of life cycle assessment and life cycle thinking comes from this concept of cradle to grave. So this idea of looking at a process or product and taking it from its beginning stages, so the raw material, whether it be a tree, if it's from this, or from the earth, if it's from a ceramic, and making it into a product that you use, and then at the end of its life, what will happen at the end. And this concept, or this kind of framework, came out of the whole idea of resource concerns about like do we have enough to are there enough people in society, or are we at the late 1960s, people like Paul Ehrlich, who is emeritus here at Stanford, he was very concerned about the idea that we're living in an unsustainable world, and that we're producing things and we're consuming things from too many people a year. And so the idea is that came out of that was that, we need to measure how sustainable everyday processes are, everyday things are. And so this science kind of developed out of that. All right. So when thinking about life cycle assessment, the main idea is deciding on what exactly are you measuring. So when thinking about this coffee cup, are you measuring like how 1 cup of coffee? If you're doing that, the idea of what is the most sustainable choice is different. It's because if you only have 1 cup, you throw this away. At the same time as this, you throw this away. This is a lot heavier and has more mass. It takes more energy to produce, and so it's not that useful. Or are you measuring something like the amount of coffee that's produced in a year, or that you drink in a year? And so the amount of that many cups that would add up as things go on. So things like that that's like the functional unit, is deciding about what exactly are you measuring and why are you measuring it. The next idea is the idea of the system boundary. And so like what processes are you including? I don't think these are following. Okay. So for example, are you just measuring the impacts of the coffee shop? So what Jonathan was talking about is like, the energy that's used in washing the cup. If you don't care about anything that happens before or after that, then your decisions can be very different than if you, for example, you take into account the processing that made the cup or the piece of paper, the paper cup, to something, or if you go back even further and yeah, thanks. You include raw materials and things like that, or all the way to end of life, so what will happen at the end. So this idea of a system boundary is deciding like what are these inputs that you're including, and how do you, the next question from that is like how do you measure that? But the idea is like the more data that you have about each process, the more you can include in each step. You mind going to the next slide? So what I just showed you, and I'll go back to it, is so the idea is that once you have this system boundary, then you have to decide, well, what kind of life cycle assessment do you want to do? And the question of that has to do with the kind of data that you have. So what I just showed you, so you might go to the next slide. All right, go back, sorry. The idea, so I just showed you in terms of like deciding like, you would include the chopping the trees to process the wood pulping that will get you to transport, and the transport that will get you to the coffee, the coffee shop, and then after when you throw it away, that whole measuring process it would be a process LCA. So you're looking at a specific process and how it will compare to another process, such as making a ceramic cup, and just doing that side-by-side comparison. There's another approach, which is kind of more based upon more of an economist approach, which is looking at what is the effect of this process or this product on the rest of the economy. So you have to think about like, the system boundary I just showed you doesn't include, for example, the people who work in the factory that processes the cup manufacturing, or the people who work in the coffee shop. How much does your cup of coffee have an impact on, or does their work go into the impact of your cup of coffee? So and think about that system can expand out till like the entire economy, and going back in time all the way back to, for example, like Watt's engine. All those things can be involved in you're making your single cup of coffee. The contribution of those things can be very, very small, but it's non-zero. And so that process is called the economic input-output LCA. And from that, you kind of get aggregate demand of looking at the entire economy. You kind of have models of the entire economy and look at how each process interacts with each other. Yeah, I'm good. So the idea of, the idea here is that you have to, in order to do an LCA, you have to think about these kinds of problems at every step of the way if you're trying to do it. So the model standard is to say, like, oh, you have some sort of goal of like, oh, you want to measure something. I want to measure the impacts of how much coffee, or the environmental impacts of drinking coffee for an entire year. What is better, a ceramic cup or a paper cup? And the idea that is also dependent upon, the question of what you're trying to answer is dependent a lot upon the data that you have. So if you don't have a lot of data about certain things, maybe you have to answer a very different type of question. Or if you only have data on, you have a lot of data on paper manufacturing and paper processing, but you don't have a lot on, transportation fuels or whatever that may be, then you might have to cater the kind of analysis you do based upon that. And so the idea, the gathering of the data of what you have, that is what's called inventory. So you basically create an inventory of, it's similar to like a greenhouse gas inventory or inventory of like, just a store inventory. You're looking at all the products that go into making the thing that you have, or go into making the store that you have. And so when you have to gather that for every process that go into making the product that you're making. Once you have that, each one of those will have, for example, you'll look at like, oh, how much steel did it was necessary to produce, the cup, or how much, because the steel was used to make the rollers that were used to flatten the paper pulp that was used to make the cup. So a lot of these things have interactive parts, and those interactive parts rely on a source of data that you can get things over. And so building an inventory forces you to answer a certain type of question versus what you might be able to do otherwise. Can I open this door?
Yeah.
Or not? Sorry about that. Can I get in? Okay. You mind going to the next slide? So yeah, so this is looking at this from the process perspective. You try to get each one of these things will have a contribution from a different part of the economy, and so the idea is that each one of these will have inputs from different sectors. It'll take the steel that goes into making your chainsaw that chops down the tree, like that will be part of the process that is cutting down trees, and you have to also things like end of life or things that you have to account for. Next slide. So once you have all those things, the inventory kind of aggregated together, then it's a matter of doing some sort of calculation to determine what the impacts that you care about are. So some of the impact categories that are typically thought about are things like energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution impacts, things like water consumption, or eutrophication, so things like that then impact local ecosystems and things like that. So these are all things that are attempted to measure for each one of these things. The issue is that you trying to measure all of them or different ones at a different time may or may not actually get you to a better answer. It's always best to, the biggest problem is that, so when most people do LCAs, they usually, especially for products like cups and things like that, they use these databases that are proprietary and are basically developed from these companies that have data that may or may not be relevant or maybe 20 years old or things like that. And so that wherever possible, people try to avoid using these databases. And the idea here is that if you have an idea of what you want to do and you have an idea with what the data that you have, it's best to cater your analysis to the data that you have, and not the other way around in terms of trying to force yourself into an answer that may or may not be relevant. So there are a lot of potential. So because life cycle assessment is just a tool or just a way of thinking about things, there's a lot of human element and a lot of opportunities for error and misuse. So a big concern people have with LCA is that there's nothing about economic costs involved. There's nothing about life cycle costs, and that's by design primarily. The purpose of an LCA is to look at the external factors that go into, so the externalities to a product. Things like waste streams or greenhouse gas emissions are not properly accounted for in a cost analysis. Another problem with doing LCAs is that a lot of products that are produced are also produced at the same time as something else. So those plates, paper plates, might be produced in the same factory that produces a cup. How do you allocate the energy use that is used in that factory for plates versus cups? It's a non-trivial answer. It's a non-trivial question, and it's something that requires flexibility on the part of the analyst to try to determine which. Do you do it by economic value? Do you do it by energy use or something like that, or like how many times it will be used in the end? There's a lot of different things to consider when doing that. So in terms of the system boundaries, like the system boundary is very crucial in terms of being able to answer a more complete question. It's easy to fudge with that in order to get to basically get the answer that you want. So a lot of, you might want to, if for example for these cups, you might want to just like, oh, we don't have any data on end of life issues, so we're just going to ignore it. Well, by putting a number, by ignoring it, you're putting a value of 0, which is not a very good thing. If you're looking at, oh, this thing is going to decay over a long period of time, it might turn into something. It might just be there for a million years and like exist in the environment. So those kinds of things are very easy things to do because we're limited by the data that we have. But the accounting for that is not a non-trivial task. The other thing is that, and I kind of mentioned this throughout, is that you're limited. The quality of your analysis is very much limited by the data that you have. A lot of times, if you can be the best analyst in the world, if you don't have data, then it's not worth actually doing anything useful with it. And so the biggest quest that as an analyst is finding good data that is representative of the process you're trying to do, and then moving from there into something that is, and then trying to answer the question based upon the data that you know. All right, so that's the end of the first part of the talk. I'm going to now talk about how I use life cycle assessment in my own research. So a big chunk of the work that I've done is looking at the life cycle greenhouse gas impacts of crude oil production. So world economy is dependent on oil consumption, unfortunately, and it's something that's still growing every year. So this is taken from the BP annual assessment of energy and just oil production or by region, and it's a growing process, and we're still using more of it. And even so, even the fact that we're still using more, if you wanted to reduce it, there's still elements of our economy, especially like aviation and things like that, that are still going to be dependent on fossil fuel production. So the idea is, can we look at decision making in terms of what oil should be produced in a climate sensitive way. So when thinking about that, about 70 to 90% of oil, the greenhouse gas emissions from oil production happen when you consume the oil at the end. So when just that you burning the gallons of gas at the end. But that's 30 to 10% or 10 to 30% that is left over is something that is dependent upon where the oil is produced and how it's produced. And there's huge variation about that. So this year is taken from the oil sands and the tar sands in Canada. I don't know if you guys know about the Keystone XL pipeline. So the idea is like this stuff is strip mined out of the soil, or they inject it with steam in order to produce it. The oil itself is heavier than water, so it sinks. Most oil is supposed to be lighter than or less dense than water. It sinks in water, and it basically you have to pump this you have to pump natural gas into this in order to create it into something that resembles in normal crude oil, and from there they make it into other products. So it's an incredible amount of energy that goes into producing this. Similarly, like this is taken from the Bakken in North Dakota. There's been a huge growth in of hydraulic fracturing. And actually, it turns out that hydraulic fracturing, from a greenhouse gas standpoint, can be on the lower side of the greenhouse gas impacts. But it depends on how it's being used. So the problem in the Bakken and other places is that there's a huge amount of flaring that's involved at the end. So they don't know, they have all this gas that they produce when they produce the oil. They don't know what to do with it. They can't, there's so much that they can't sell it. And the wells decline so fast that it's not worth them building pipelines out to be able to produce it. So they just burn it. You can see it from space. And so those are things that when you're looking at a life cycle assessment of oil production, taking that flaring of oil, which is basically a waste product, or it could have been a co-product that is going to produce, electricity or something like that, instead of just burning to the atmosphere. That is something that you have to take into consideration. So, yeah. So this is taken from a project that I've been involved with called the Oil Climate Index. It's a collaboration with my advisor Adam Brandt, Joel Bergeson at University of Calgary, and Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And the idea here is looking at crudes from around the world, represent about 70 different crudes from around the world, representing about 25% of world oil production. You can go to the website, it's really cool. It has information about each one of these different crudes and where the greenhouse gas impacts occur on each different level. Might go to the next slide. So that, from an LCA perspective, what does this mean? So we have different models that represent both the production element, the refining element, and then at the end the combustion element at the end. And each of those models is based upon either fundamental engineering calculations. So it takes a certain amount of energy to crack the hydrocarbon into making it into gasoline versus jet fuel or something like that. And so those kinds of things are engineering calculations that can be done in a model. We also have operator reported data where that's available, and that's really helpful to be able to check with the models that we have in terms of being able to, as everything's okay. And then the other things that we do is, for example, with this oil field flaring from the Bakken, is that we use satellite imagery that basically is able to look at the brightness, look at the brightness from the nighttime image and determine how much is being burned at that particular location. And so this is an example from the tool. The lights here are flares from around the world, and the brightness being the bigger size of the flare. And the circles there are representative of how significant the flaring is in terms of volumes. So there's a large amount of flaring in the United States and Canada, or less in Canada, but more less in the United States. In Venezuela and Nigeria, huge amounts of flaring around the world. And Russia is huge. For the next slide. So here's kind of what the results kind of look like. The idea here, you don't have to necessarily look at the details of it. The idea here is that what makes a crude dirtier in terms of carbon intensity is both the idea that if you're extremely heavy, like these are the tar sand crudes here, or if you flare a lot. So this here is from Texas. It's similar to Bakken. Flare field in Nigeria are similar. So those things basically, they either take a lot of energy to produce it into making something that's useful, or they waste a lot of the products that are involved with producing it. If you go to the next slide. So incidentally, so this here is also a Texas crude that's from the same oil field as the other one. But the difference is, so the difference is that, well, one, this isn't part of the field where they don't flare. So that difference is mostly because it's not flared. The other reason why this is so low is that the oil that is produced is basically gasoline. So it does not need to be refined very much. And so those are different parts of the life cycle that have different impacts because of it. So it's the same exact crude. It just happens to be in a different, like it's 20 miles north of where the other one is, and it's in the region where it's super, they have gas that they don't want to use, and so they flare it, as opposed to here where they have gas where they are able to use it, and then they send it off. I think that's, yeah, go on to the next one. Yeah, so this just pretty much done here. So the idea here is, lifecycle assessment is a tool. It's just a way of thinking about a problem to be able to understand the environmental impact as broadly defined of a different product or process in order to make a comparison between different things. It's a model system, so it requires simplification of either the economy or the processes that you're looking at, and so it's messy when you do that kind of thing. And the general field that this is involved with is called industrial ecology, and I think that's a really apt term because you're trying to, ecology is a really complex thing where you're trying to understand how ecosystems work together and different systems of different trophic levels are interacting. And similarly, you have these industrial processes that have huge amount of interconnections or different things are playing together. And we as humans are not just as complicated, but we make intentionally complicated systems too, as we're trying to get the most out of these different raw materials. And the other thing is to think about is that the data availability and the things that you're concerned about are kind of driving factors for what makes something an analysis useful. And the other thing is that just like any sort of model, confirmation bias is a huge problem. It's easy to draw your system out in a way that makes your product look good and make something else look bad. So if you see something about like, oh, the environmental impact of different things, be careful about who is producing it and why. Just like anything, reading anything else, most people who do these life cycle assessments are, they usually do the best job, but like, it's really easy to make it so it seem like, punch something very small and make it seem like your product looks better than something else. So it's something to be cognizant of. If this is something that interests you or doing something, I highly encourage, or if you're in general interested in doing research at Stanford, neurosciences, there's the CSER program. I don't know how many of you guys know about the CSER program. It's the summer, your Earth Science Summer Research Program. It gives you money to be able to work with a professor and do some really research on interesting topics. We have people from our group come every year, and if you're an undergrad, I think it's January 17th, there's a meeting that you guys can go to. It's a really cool opportunity to do world-class research. There are papers that are written based upon people's summer work, and it's really, really great thing that Stanford provides. So if you're interested in that, you can talk to me or something that, you're interested. So I'm happy to take questions now, and I hope that this was interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
So I have a couple questions. First is, are you aware of life cycle assessments in coffee cups and paper mugs? And the second one is, if you're comparing, you find two separate studies for one for a ceramic coffee cup and another one for a paper cup, what would you look for to be certain that the analysis is conducted in such a way with the boundaries and considering the co-products and whatever, so that you know that you're comparing apples to apples?
Yeah, so thanks for the first one. I buried the lead in terms of this. So for a ceramic cup, the ceramic cup becomes, it breaks even in terms of greenhouse gas usage after the 15th or 20th time you use it. So if you have a cup of coffee every day, but if you use this every day for a month, then you'll be doing better with a ceramic cup than with a paper cup, or using a paper cup every day. In terms of energy usage, it's about it's closer to 25 to 30. So that's your first question. And in terms of being a good reader of analysis, one is to look at if there are multiple studies being done, and try to see if you could aggregate, basically do your own LCA aggregator in terms of impacts. That's one thing to look at, is just see if there's a broader analysis that's being done about these kind of things. the other thing is to look at what they've done in terms of where they've got where they got their data from. If they've just used the basic databases for people to do it, I would be more skeptical about it. But that doesn't mean that it would discount it entirely. It's just more about like, okay, do they understand the pitfalls of using that kind of data? The other thing is just look at what things are in their system, their system boundary, and to think about that as being like to try to catch them and make them a mistake, and to think like, oh, like what kinds of things should I be thinking about? And once you see a system boundary, you can usually think like, oh, they didn't look at this thing, and like probably go on from there and try to see if that's a problem or not. Sometimes they don't include things, not because it could be for a very good reason. It could be that it's not that significant. And so it's something that's usually, those are like rabbit trails that are worth going down and trying to see if they're actually if there's anything there or not. That's part of what I do in my research, is going down these rabbit holes and trying to figure out if there's anything there or not. Sometimes you go and it's a lot of dead ends, but that's the research process. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm sorry we came in a little late and you might have spoken about this already, but I was wondering about the kind of the consumer-facing side of LCA, because you're talking about products that like people like us are using. I was wondering, is there an example of where LCAs have been used and has been kind of shown to consumers, and whether that affects behaviors at all?
Yeah. So a lot of I think it's actually something that's going to become more popular now that, like, for example, at universities, people have these sustainability studies. So like, it's kind of what's driven. Like for Stanford, they still give out water bottles every year for at the dorms or in the dining halls, because at some point like they gave out free metal water bottles at some point. And so the idea is like, oh, they made a decision that like having people have a metal water bottle will be better in the long term for the long-term sustainability, because like having your water bottle versus buying bottled water, there's no question about that, because if you think about it, like you have to have a truck that carries water to something if you have like a bottle of water, right, as opposed to just getting water out of the tap. So yeah, it takes steel to make, or aluminum to make your water bottle, or whatever plastics involved, but it's much less than like trucking water to somewhere. So yeah, it's something that it's being involved on the institutional level, but the question is like, how much do consumers involved with it? There are a lot of companies that try to do that. I know like Levi's with their jeans, they try to get people to wash their jeans less, because like those are impacts involved with their life cycle. But it's not just like anything involved with sustainability. It's pretty down low on the totem pole of things that companies care about. But it's depending on what you're looking at, it could be more involved. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of just to add on.
Yeah, she worked at Apple, wasn't doing LCA stuff, so.
Just to add on that, I think like over the course of years, there are actually more and more companies who are interested in doing consumer-facing LCAs for consumer-facing products. Like Danone did LCAs for their yogurt, and like Levi's did LCAs for the jeans, and like in the electronics space, Apple, HP, multiple companies, they've been looking at. So there's a fair amount of data on LCAs, also like coffee, and I can think of a lot of products. But your second question is interesting. There's not that many studies on how those LCA results affect people's behavior, and a lot of the comments are like anecdotal. And I get feedbacks from people on how they think of certain numbers, but I haven't seen any systematic study on whether people would change their behavior, or do people really care about it.
So there are studies that are done that basically go out and do surveys of people and try to say like, oh, do you know about the difference between making this choice or not, and like how do you make decisions about different things. But that's part of the consciousness of like what it means to be like environmentally conscious, and that idea is like something that's it's very underdeveloped in terms of what people think about, because people have different ideas of what that means, and so that can manifest in different places.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And, and I'm not a student, and I'm one of those people that are very sensitive about how can I be a better steward of our, ecology, right?
Yeah.
So I want to make better decisions on, do I buy a Keurig and with all those throwaway or not? Do I
Right.
use the drip, and so I'm wondering about, is there a higher weight in the process of the system? Because there's the energy of creation, and then there's how long this is going to last. How long does it take for these things to degrade? You
Yeah,
know what I
exactly.
mean? Like styrofoam isn't an example you use.
Right, but yeah, that's like another kind of cup that you can use as well. So like styrofoam is much less energy intense than making something out of paper, but its end of life is a big problem, right? Because it's like
It'll never die.
it'll never die unless you it never turns into anything. So that's a big question.
So is there a place actually I can find out about the Keurig? Because I'm consumer sensitive.
Yeah, so that one in particular, I could pretty much say definitively that that it's better to have a drip coffee from it's less convenient. I get that, but in terms of because you have the different pods and those things are made of plastic and they forever degrade, and so things like that it's just a material consumption thing.
There is a reusable Keurig pod.
Yeah.
Yes, there is. There's
And,
the ones
and
that
I have that, and I also use the drip, and I use French press, and but the fact is that even I would not have assumed that there was like a number of 10 or 15 for the ceramic cup, that there is a number that makes the ceramic break even with the paper.
right. Yeah, and the other thing is should you drink if you prefer coffee or tea? So
don't take my coffee away.
Yeah, I'm not taking it away. I'm just saying that if you want to think of those are the different questions. Can you make a substitute between one and the other? Obviously, people are very sensitive about their coffee drinking, so I'm not gonna get it. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Yes, Danielle.
I was wondering, where do we see gaps in the data the most? So, for example, for the cups, or even for your oil consumption data, when you're trying to do this life cycle assessment, where do you see the most gaps, and is it transportation of goods, or
Yeah, so the biggest thing is looking at things that are not direct consumption related. So oftentimes getting energy consumption data is much more straightforward than, for example, looking at looking at other impacts that you're looking at. So if you're looking at air quality impacts or things like that might be a little bit more difficult. Depends on where it comes from. So, biggest issue with getting data for oil production is that there are a lot of parts of the world where they don't share any data, and it's like Venezuela or Russia. We'd love to get as much data as possible from them. It's it's a complete black box there, and so we have to use estimates based upon the characteristics of the field to be able to get an idea of what's going on. From a product perspective, it usually is some things that are direct flows between the different ideas, different processes. So the idea of you might not know the actual distribution of how many cups are being sent from wherever the pulping plants are to the distribution center. So the transportation might be an issue, but it also might be an issue you might get a sense of how much aggregate is being produced out of a big plant, but the co-products would be an issue. So if they produce both plates and cups in the facility, then it's kind of like a total black box in terms of how you allocate the energies or the different impacts for that one. So that's the biggest concern we're looking at. We produce a lot of different things at the same places. Yeah.
I have a question about your research.
Okay.
Are you expecting companies to look at your research and reduce their flaring or change their behavior in some way?
Well, I think that from that perspective, it's more about informing regulators that they should be caring about this kind of thing. Ideally, we'd like to be able to just say we go to Chevron or Shell and tell them you're flying too much and reduce it. But there's a reason why they don't do it. They made the economic analysis that they're not going to make the money in the end. But if we can convince regulators that it's worth from an air quality standpoint or from a greenhouse gas standpoint, that flaring all this stuff will, create smog in San Antonio or Austin or something like that, and people will die. Then maybe they can get a better audience for that kind of information.
And related to it, have you seen specific policy proposal based on life cycle assessment?
Yes. So there in California, there's an active policy that's been around for about 5 years now. It's called the Low Carbon Fuel Standard. And so basically, they take all oil production or all liquid fuels and basically put it in its own carbon market. And so each fuel you kind of bid into the market saying like, oh, I want to import fuel from Saudi Arabia. If you want to do that, it goes through the models that kind of we've developed and say like, okay, this is what its greenhouse gas impact and how does it compare to the average crude that is being produced in California, or how does it produce compared to ethanol or something like that. So yeah, California is one, Canada's developing one, there's one, the European Union has its own market. So it's kind of separate from the normal carbon markets that are here. Obviously, you have to live in a world where you have to care about that in the first place. So, greater U.S., there were proposals that were part of the cap and trade regulations that went nowhere in 2009. Obviously, will be going nowhere in the next foreseeable future. But those are things that have been actively talked about in terms of regulation. Yeah.
I guess natural gas is kind of often touted as being a more environmentally friendly fuel source than coal.
Yes.
How true is that statement? And is it? And especially when I'm sure this data is probably very hard to come by, that there is some amount of leakage in different pipelines, and when natural gas is leaked, that has a much stronger environmental impact than when it's actually burned. So I guess how true is that statement when compared to coal?
Yeah, so that's what the rest of my research is studying is natural gas leakage. And as a broad question in terms of if you're comparing it to coal, I think it's been overwhelmingly shown that natural gas does better than coal, even when including this leakage. There was a paper that came out that was kind of mostly it was kind of a bad paper, but it kind of showed like, oh, we should be really concerned about natural gas leakage. It could be upwards of 10%, which would make it, significantly worse than coal, because when natural gas leaks, it's methane, which is about 30 times more greenhouse gas than CO2. It turns out that they didn't they were kind of fudging their numbers and didn't do a very good job. But the result of that, there was a ton of science that went into trying to get a better sense of what those numbers are. And I think that it's come around to be about between 1% and 2%, which safely makes it less greenhouse gas intensive than coal, but compared to any nuclear or any renewables, there's no question that it's more impactful. So that's I can talk about that kind of stuff a lot because that's the rest of what my research is. But yeah, this is
I guess if nobody else has any extra questions, thank you guys for coming. I'm going to be here for the next 10 minutes. Somebody wants to talk about hard earth in general as a class. I'm not sure how long you're going to be around, but please come talk to me, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.